Lymphoid organs work with the lymphatic system and have very similar structure and function, but they are hooked to other parts of the body. They are not directly connected to the lymphatic vessels, and they don't process lymph. They're scattered around the body in other locations. So let's look at these individually. The spleen is the first one we'll look at, and this one sits in the abdomen. It's up against the diaphragm on the left side. In humans, it's around the size of your fist or a little bit bigger. And this is the largest of the lymphoid organs, and it generally duplicates the functions of a few of the other organs. So number one, it is a site of proliferation of T and B cells, like the lymph nodes. It participates in immune surveillance and response, like lymph nodes. It's going to clear the blood of damaged red blood cells and platelets. So the liver also does this. It stores platelets for later use. So excess platelets can be stored in the spleen. That's a fairly unique function of the spleen. That's sort of the one special thing that it does. And then in the fetus, it's the site of red blood cell production. In adults or after we're born, that's really the red bone marrow only. But in the fetus, the spleen plays a role in red blood cell production. Now, you can live without a spleen if you absolutely have to. Sometimes there's a traumatic injury and it's losing blood internally too quickly and has to be surgically removed. And other organs can pick up the extra work, the liver, the bone marrow, whatever. But it is important for immune surveillance because it has a very large blood supply. It's constantly filtering the blood. So people who have been splenectomized, who don't have a spleen, are at increased risk for specific infectious disease, especially blood-borne parasites. Now, there are two distinct areas of the spleen, the white pulp and the red pulp, and we can look at these in a diagram in a couple of slides. So the white pulp is actually around the central arteries. They're bringing blood into the spleen. And these are mostly lymphocytes on reticular fibers, and these are doing immune surveillance. If you look at it under a microscope, it looks very, very dark because lymphocytes, if you remember, are mostly nucleus with very little cytoplasm. So the white pulp on a microscope, when you're looking at a stain slide, looks really dark. And then we have the red pulp, and there's a lot of red blood cells and macrophages, and this is where we're doing the cleanup of old or damaged red blood cells and bloodborne pathogens. Now, the spleen has a capsule, just like the lymph node, trabeculae, just like the lymph nodes, and it has lymphocytes and macrophages, much like the lymph node. Okay, here's a picture of the spleen where it's sitting just under the diaphragm. And you can see the very large splenic artery leading into it, and it's leading into the hilum, the little that sort of little central area where a lot of things come and go. And you can see the pancreas sort of sitting just under it there. If we look at some diagrams here, you can see the splenic artery and vein that are entering and leaving from the hilum or the hilar area. And then we've got that white pulp around the arteries coming in where we're going to do a lot of immune surveillance with the lymphocytes, and then the red pulp in most of the rest of the spleen where the macrophages are doing the cleanup of old red blood cells. The next lymphoid organ is the thymus, and the thymus sits in our mediastinum, so the central thoracic chamber, and this is very important early in life. This is a place where the T cells mature. Now, all of our blood cells are born in the bone marrow, but T cells, before they mature, move to the thymus. And this is, so T for thymus, and this is where the thymus is going to help them mature and also weed out any ones that don't do their job correctly. So it's very important early in life. The thymus is quite large in children, young animals, and then after puberty and into early adult, it starts to atrophy. We can still, as adults, produce new T cells, but just not as many. And if you think about it, a child or an infant, there's a lot of new diseases that they are exposed to early in life. And so there's a lot of education of an individual's immune system as we grow up. But then once you're an adult, in theory, we've seen a lot of what the environment has to offer in the way of diseases. So, so we don't make as many new cells. Now, it's different from the other lymphoid organs in that it has no follicles because there are no B cells. So no germinal centers, no follicles. And it's not going to directly do any kind of immune surveillance or fighting disease. So its job is to keep those T cells isolated until they are ready to go and they're released into the bloodstream. And they do this via a blood-thymus barrier. So we have a blood-brain barrier that protects the brain and keeps it a little more isolated from the rest of the body. Same thing for the thymus. We don't want these immature T cells to be activated too early. We need to keep them separate. And then what the thymus will do then is we'll basically test each of these cells as they grow up, if you will, and make sure they can do their job properly, and also that they won't attack any self-proteins. We don't want to release any T cells into the body that might attack our own cells. So the thymus has a cortex and a medulla, much like some of the other lymphatic and lymphoid organs, and most of the cells are lymphocytes. So the cortex has a lot of rapidly dividing lymphocytes and some macrophages, and then the medulla has Hassel's corpuscles, also called thymic corpuscles, and this they believe are having to do with the development of regulatory T cells. And this is another type of T lymphocyte that is going to have a calming effect on the immune system and keep our immune system from getting out of hand. The thymus makes a variety of hormones: thymulin, thymosin, thymopoietin. Research is still ongoing about exactly what they do, but they have a role in the development and maturation of the lymphocytes. Now here's a histologic view or light microscope view of a cross-section of the thymus. And you can also see in that upper image where it sits. So it's sort of sitting in the mediastinum, that central core of the thorax above the heart. Okay, we just had the outer capsule and the trabeculae that you can see, those little invaginations going in. The cortex is that dark staining outer layer with all the lymphocytes in it. And then we have the lighter staining medulla with these little whorls. And it looks initially like they might be blood vessels, but if you look more closely, they're actually concentric circles it's actually keratinized epithelial cells. And that is the site of the hormone production of the hormones I just talked about. And they're believed to be also the site of regulatory T lymphocyte production. Now I have a variety of lymphoid tissue and all scattered around other parts of the body. So there are aggregates of lymphoid tissue, and these are mucosa-associated lymphoid tissues, a lot of these. So that means that they are sitting under a mucous membrane or in the vicinity of a mucous membrane as sort of a way to have a presence of an immune system in areas where there's a lot of coming and going from our body. So there's some of the major ones are Peyer's patches. These are clusters of lymphoid follicles that are in the wall of the small intestine, sort of just underneath the mucosa. And we have many more of them in the ileum. So as we get down toward the distal portion, the farther down we go in the small intestine, the more numerous they become. And also there's some similar structures in the appendix. And if you think about it, we have a normal gut flora, bacterial populations that live inside the gut. We need them, they need us, but they also really need to stay there, and we don't want them getting deeper into the body or in the bloodstream because that goes from helpful to deadly very quickly. So we have Peyer's patches and the appendix to help keep control of these bacterial populations and keep them where they belong. And they also will have memory lymphocytes as well, just like in the other lymphoid organs. Now, the mucosal-associated lymphatic tissues, lymphoid tissue, the largest collection of these are the tonsils, Peyer's patches, and appendix. So tonsils are around the pharynx. So the entrance of our digestive tract and our respiratory system. Lots of motion here, fluid and food and air coming and going. Very good place to have some extra immune presence there to do surveillance and action if we need it. There are also malts in the, it's sort of associated with the genital tract, the urinary tract, and the respiratory tract. And having a quick look at the tonsils, we have some specific tonsils. So we have the palatine tonsils that are at the posterior end of the oral cavity on either side. And then we have the lingual tonsil, and that's at the base of the tongue. I don't know if you can see that here, but way down at the base of the tongue. And then the pharyngeal tonsil is at the end or the posterior aspect of the nasopharynx. And then we have tubal tonsils that are the opening of the auditory canals going to the ear. So these are all around the pharynx, and their job is to collect data, and if they find something that doesn't belong, to mount an immune response. So they're going to gather and remove pathogens in food or air, and they've got germinal centers with follicles, just like the lymph nodes. So we have B cells in addition to T cells and macrophages. And unlike other of the lymphoid organs, this does not have a big, thick capsule. We want to have lots of access to the surface, so the tonsils have these deep crypts to allow things like food and air to have more contact and come deep down into this organ. So we're going to trap and destroy bacteria or particulate matter that are there and allow the immune system to see whatever's coming through, sort of sample it. Now, it used to be very popular if these became inflamed to take them out, but in recent years, we try to leave them in because now we understand their role much better. However, occasionally one will become abscessed and join the dark side, and we still need to go ahead and remove it. The immune system is there to protect our body from things that don't belong. So our body can identify things